Today, we're diving into a legal case that is just so fascinating. It's part human drama, part mind-bending legal puzzle. It's the story of a marriage that for years only existed on paper, and it forced a court to look deep into the human psyche to find its answer.
I mean, think about it. What actually happens when a marriage is never consummated? It feels like a super personal question, right? But it's also a profound legal one. And this very question was at the heart of a landmark case that really challenged the definition of a fundamental legal term. All right, let's set the scene. We're going back to 1993. In India, you've got a marriage, but you've got no consummation. So the court was handed this puzzle. Was this just a simple refusal, or was there something much deeper going on? Let's unravel this thing.
Before we get into all the legal jargon, we've got to understand the people involved. At the center of this whole story are Justyn Cyril, who brought the case, and his wife, Hannah Vasanthie. Their personal story is what would end up setting a major legal precedent. So here's a quick look at the timeline. They get married in 1986, and for the next 7 years, the marriage remains unconsummated. This situation is what finally leads them to the Madras High Court in 1993. Now, 7 years, that is a long time, and that duration becomes a really key piece of evidence. So what was Justyn's side of the story? Well, he laid out some very specific claims. He said that from day one, his wife Hannah consistently, and sometimes violently, resisted any and all attempts at intimacy. And here's the crucial part of his argument. He claimed this wasn't just her being unwilling. He said this pattern was so deep-seated that it actually amounted to legal impotency. And that claim, well, that brings us right to the heart of the legal challenge here. The court had to walk this incredibly fine line. It had to make this crucial distinction between someone choosing not to do something and someone being unable to do something. And this is where the stakes get really high. See, willful refusal is a choice. It's a matter of will, and that's usually grounds for a divorce. But impotency, that's totally different. That's an inability. It could be physical or, as we'll see, psychological. And that is grounds for an annulment, which basically says the marriage was never valid to begin with. The entire future for Justyn and Hannah really hinged on this one distinction.
So this is it. This is the million-dollar question the judge had to answer. Was Hannah's constant, sometimes forceful refusal a conscious decision she was making over and over again? Or was it an outward symptom of some deeper, invisible barrier, a psychological incapacity she just couldn't control?
Now, to solve this puzzle, the court couldn't just look at the facts in front of them. They had to become legal detectives, digging into past cases to see how other courts had tackled similar, really tricky situations. Okay, so first things first, what does the rulebook say? The law that governed their marriage, the Indian Divorce Act of 1869, already had a definition for impotency. It could be either physical or psychological. But the key thing was it had to exist when the marriage started and it had to continue throughout. Okay, so here's where the detective work gets really interesting. The court looked back at an earlier case, and this case had established a really powerful idea, that a court could infer an underlying problem from someone's behavior. A consistent refusal could be seen as evidence of an invincible repugnance, basically a deep-seated, overwhelming aversion to the act. And get this, the same case went on to describe this state as a paralysis of the will. I mean, what a striking phrase, right? It suggests this condition where the mind is so strongly opposed to something that it pretty much shuts down the body's ability to participate, even if there's nothing physically wrong.
The law also made another subtle but absolutely vital distinction. The issue wasn't whether Hannah was impotent in general. No, the question was whether she was impotent specifically in relation to her husband, Justyn. Her incapacity could be entirely specific to this one relationship, and that would still be enough to meet the legal standard.
So, with all these facts and all these legal precedents in hand, the court was finally ready. It was time to put all the pieces of this puzzle together and deliver its final ruling. The court's logic was actually pretty straightforward and methodical. First, they established the basic facts. 7 years, no consummation, constant resistance. Check. Second, they noted that this wasn't a one-time thing. It was a continuous pattern from the very beginning. And from that pattern, they made the big leap, the critical legal inference. They decided this behavior wasn't just a choice. It was a symptom of that invincible repugnance, a true psychological incapacity. And so, the verdict was in. The court granted Justyn Cyril's petition. The marriage was declared null and void. It wasn't just ended, Legally speaking, the court decided it had never truly existed in its complete intended form. So, a very personal story from decades ago ends with a court ruling. But why are we still talking about it today? Well, because the legacy of this case goes far beyond the two people involved. This decision was a landmark for a few big reasons. First, it powerfully affirmed that impotency isn't just physical, it can absolutely be psychological. Second, it established that courts can infer this incapacity from behavior alone, without needing a doctor's note, so to speak. And really, it's just a perfect example of how the law, which can sometimes feel so rigid, is actually able to adapt to the messy, complex realities of human psychology. And all of this leaves us with a final, really fascinating question to think about. This case gave us one answer, but the dilemma is still there. In these matters of the heart and the mind, how does the law continue to draw that incredibly fine line between what we choose to do and what we are truly capable of doing?